What if every conflict you've ever had was actually just your soul trying to teach you something about unconditional love? And I know how that sounds, but stick with me for a second. We throw around the word validation like it's some basic relationship skill. Like it's about saying, that sounds hard when someone's having a bad day. But real validation, the kind that actually transforms relationships and heals trauma, I think it's something entirely different. I think it's about learning someone so completely that they remember who they really are, underneath all of their defenses and patterns and pain. It's about holding space for another person's truth without abandoning your own. It's about loving someone exactly as they are while they're making choices that you can't understand. I feel like most people have gotten pretty good at the basic validation stuff now, or at least in my circle, and I know I live in a bubble. But thank God for that viral reel on Instagram teaching us all to ask, do you need support or solutions? So we figured out how to listen without immediately jumping into fix-it mode. But there are situations where it's a lot harder to validate. Like when you're watching people you love make choices that feel completely wrong to you. Or when your values and their values seem to be on different planets. The kind of disagreements that are tearing families and friendships apart because there's just so much division right now. The kind of conflict where people realize that they're not just trying to be right, they're fighting for their entire sense of self, their worldview, their identity, everything they thought they knew about who they are and what matters, which is one of the reasons why basing your entire identity on your political views is not the best idea. That's when I understood that most of us think that love means agreement. We think that if we truly see someone's perspective, we're somehow losing our own, or even worse, ourselves. So we choose ego over connection. We choose being right over staying open. But what if that's exactly backwards? There's this concept in psychology called validation. I'm sure you've heard of it before. But 30 years ago, it transformed therapy. Therapists learned how to hold space for people's deepest pain without trying to fix it or change it. And they discovered that when someone truly feels seen, not judged, not corrected, just witnessed, something profound shifts. And not just in their behavior, but in their entire nervous system. The Buddha talked about this thousands of years ago when he taught about loving kindness, the practice of extending compassion, even to those who harm us. He understood that true wisdom comes from seeing the suffering behind someone's actions, not just in the actions themselves. And Jesus demonstrated the same thing when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," even while being crucified. Although that kind of sounds like a passive-aggressive burn in a way, doesn't it? Well, he was validating their humanity while completely disagreeing with their choices. This idea that love isn't about changing people. It's about seeing them so completely that they remember who they really are. Well, the science backs this up too. When we feel validated, our stress hormones drop. Our prefrontal cortex comes back online. So we are literally more capable of growth and change, but only when we're not being forced into it. But here's what gets me. We live in a world where everyone's trying to wake each other up by arguing, by proving points, by being right. And I have to admit, I've been guilty of that same thing. But what if the most radical thing you could do is learn to love someone exactly as they are while they're making choices that you just don't get and you never will? So what if validation isn't just a communication technique, but it's a spiritual practice? A way of seeing the divine in someone, even when their human self is making a mess of it all. Well, today we're talking to Caroline Fleck. She's a psychologist who spent over 10 years mastering validation through DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. Well, she's discovered that this one skill can keep relationships intact even when you're on the opposite sides of everything. So 3 key things you will learn are why validation has nothing to do with agreement and why that distinction saves relationships, how to stay connected to people even when their choices make no sense to you, and how to validate others while holding on to your own truth and boundaries.
And so what we find with folks who come from those environments is that no, they don't trust their emotions. They have learned to disregard and dismiss them. Instead, they defer to the environment to tell them what they're thinking or feeling. They don't have a great sense of self, okay? All of these things have been fractured and compromised. Now, the question is, can that be reclaimed? Yes. And again, part of that process is providing clear signals to those individuals about when their emotions, when their thoughts, when their behaviors are valid, and when there's something off there.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
So I am loving your book, and it's so important because I feel like one of the biggest shifts in my life was when I realized how many things I was doing for validation. And I still have to check in with myself, even now, where I'm like, why does something feel off? Where's this coming from? Oh, what was really underneath the desire of that behavior? So
Exactly.
how did validation become part of your life story?
Yeah, it actually dates back over a decade ago. I was training to become a dialectical behavior therapist. And DBT is a treatment that was developed for folks with borderline personality disorder, which is like very serious psychopathology, folks who often struggle with really dangerous behaviors, self-harm, suicidality. And this treatment did something no other treatments had done before it. And that was to combine behaviorism, like positive reinforcement, shaping habits, all of the things we hear about in all of the books, with validation. And when I vividly remember being in this lecture and sitting there and having this PowerPoint displaying these different levels of validation, basically different ways in which you could validate somebody. As a therapist, I was learning this for how to validate patients. And I was thinking, why am I just learning this now? Like, why do I have to be getting a PhD in psychology and then mastering a very specific treatment for a very specific population to get access to something that will serve me in every relationship? I mean, like you said, I had such an aha moment of like, oh, this is what we're actually fighting about. Like, this is what we're actually missing, longing for, needing, and just having those skills available to me, it just transformed my life. Not just my practice, for sure.
What is the difference between validation and praise? Because I grew up in the time where it felt like this big new finding that they're like, oh,
Yeah.
like praise your children. And so we were praised quite a bit, or at least I was. I was also an only child, so maybe that's part of it.
Yes.
But it's like we are always swinging this pendulum of like, okay, no, you actually have to tell your kids you love them. Oh, wild. Or no, praise them for the good things they do. Oh, but now you're praising them too much. Oh, now you're praising them on the wrong thing. You need to praise them for the effort, not for the accomplishment. And so when you're looking at what validation even is, how do you discern it?
Yeah. So excellent question, because I think validation, once you understand that concept, it actually helps you navigate a lot of that noise. So praise is a judgment. It's a positive judgment. It's saying, good job, or I like the way you performed, or I like the way you look if you're on like Instagram and people are giving you like heart emojis, right? All of that is praise. It's a positive judgment. Validation, on the other hand, is non-judgmental. It communicates acceptance. So it says, I accept you independent of how you look or perform. I accept how you feel about this situation, even if I don't agree with your reasoning. Okay. So it's a fundamentally different message. And it's ironic because forever we've been told not to seek external validation, as if it's unhealthy or needy or X, Y, or Z, when in fact, the need to be accepted, to be part of a tribe, is part of what makes us human. It is part of what differentiates us from other animals, that need for acceptance. And so the research on this is pretty solid. It is not that we become egotistical, narcissistic, fill in the blank when we receive a lot of validation. It's quite the opposite. We develop a stronger sense of who we are, of our emotions. We feel accepted in our relationships, in whole in ourselves. And so, contrary to popular belief, we could all use a lot more external validation.
That is pretty eye-opening. Validation isn't the same as agreeing someone. So it's kind of like showing someone that you get them, or that you accept them, or that they aren't deserving of rejection, even if you don't agree with what they're saying at all. And I think that's such an important thing for both sides of the validation chain, the person being validated, but also giving that. It reminds me of, it's funny, I almost interviewed these two people who wrote a book. They wrote a book on the fact that they were reading a book every 2 weeks and applying the lessons for 2 weeks and then moving on. And I was like, what a fascinating concept. But when I was doing the interview, I realized very quickly, oh, this means that they didn't actually get anything in the book because they started going off about how, no, forgiveness isn't worth it because you're like, how are you going to forgive somebody who did this? And I'm like, oh, so you're still stuck at that part. It just reminds me of that with validation. It's not saying, oh, I agree with what you're doing or condoning it, just like forgiveness. It's, two different things. One is validating. It's saying that you see someone really, or that you understand as much as you can from your point of view. Same as forgiveness is more like releasing yourself of holding on to that negativity.
Well, along those lines, and this is going to sound not just counterintuitive, but wrong. Like I said, dialectical behavior therapy was a treatment for folks who are engaging in very often dangerous, self-destructive, or externally destructive behavior. So the need for folks to change is real, okay? And that was the fascinating thing about this work, is that when you accept people and you communicate that is often the conduit to change. And so when folks come to see me, if I am just hammering all of the things that they're doing wrong, or all the things that they need to change to think better, feel better, look better, X, Y, or Z, they're not actually likely to change. Some people are, right? Like they may be type A, but plenty of folks, and if you've ever raised an adolescent, you know what it feels like when it's so clear to you what the other person needs to think or do, and they just won't do it, right? In those moments, oddly enough, when you pivot and you start to convey some degree of like, I accept you. I accept how you're feeling, like I said about the situation. Even if I don't agree, I get it. That is often the turning point in, therapy for sure, but just about any conflict or dynamic. It's that moment that kind of loosens people up to be more receptive. So it's a really kind of wild process. And the crazier thing is that if you go into it thinking like, okay, I'm gonna validate them just so I can get them to like do what I think they should do or do what I want, it won't work. You have to like literally just have the intention of validating the other person's experience, no strings attached, and then things kind of loosen up. It's really weird.
Yeah. So all of us that were thinking, ooh, we can play mind games here.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me, though, because that's exactly how I've found self-development to work, too. Mm-hmm. It's so funny. We think that working on ourselves, a lot of people think it's selfish, or everything I've done to work on myself has helped me with raising children. It's helped me with my relationships. And often it's learning one way or the other and then turning it around to the other one. And so
that's so true.
Having children I didn't realize how much managing my inner child was actually the last step to the change that I really wanted. And with self-work, so often we try to beat ourselves into submission, but it's when we actually get the compassion and we look inside and say, I see you. I see that you're not bad. I see that you're not broken. And you kind of allow the feelings, allow the craving, allow the misstep. It becomes a lot easier to start rewiring your own behavior. So it makes sense to me that that would work the same in validating in a relationship.
Yeah, it's funny. That's a great point. Like these things that seem like they shouldn't coexist often do. And once you appreciate that, there's something that's kind of loosened up for you. I was doing a podcast interview with someone who was a bit of a personality, and he really believes in like meat eating as the dietary way to go. And I, of course, am a vegetarian and, of course, brought that up straight out the gate, right? As an example of like, hey, as a vegetarian, if I wanted to change someone's opinion, maybe I would present a bunch of evidence, but I could also just sit back and like validate, hey, there's valid reasons why you might choose to eat meat, right? And so we kind of get into it like right out the gate in this interview. And it was fascinating because what I said was like, I think there are valid reasons people eat meat. And let me list off a couple hundred, right? Like I was a meat eater for most of my life. I completely get it. And I can just validate at that level without giving all of my counter arguments for why I think you shouldn't eat meat, right? But just leaving it at that, he kind of responded with, okay, and I can actually see a bunch of valid reasons why you would want to be a vegetarian. And so we ended up having this conversation that continued offline, in which I think we both unintentionally influenced the other just through our efforts to like really show that we could like validate each other. I don't know. That's sounding confusing, but it was very surreal and cool to have it play out in real time in that way.
I see that in my relationship with my husband. When we have a dynamic, and when I started or he started, I don't even know who started, just coming to the table a little bit earlier and owning our side instead of continuously blaming the other person. And we're both on the path of self-development. We have tools, and it's easy to do now because I know he's not the type of person that's going to be like, oh, well, I'm glad you finally see that you're wrong. Like I know that he's going to come to the table as soon as I do, or vice versa. And so might as well get it over with now and open our hearts a little.
You make such a good point, actually, which is, and this is something I tell anybody who's working on developing kind of validation skills or validating more in their relationships, is that initially it's hard because you've got to put down being right. Like, you know what's right, and you kind of have to put that down to try and be effective. And that's kind of not natural or fun in the moment. But my God, if it isn't reinforcing. Like you do this a couple of times and it's so, it's just like I was, describing with that podcast interview I did. It's such a generally such a positive experience that you feel reinforced for doing it. And it does start to become more natural. It does start to, so like when I find myself becoming defensive, my natural inclination now is honestly to try and like, all right, let me see what's valid in the other person's perspective. Not let me make my case harder. Let me bring more points. Let me reiterate. That's what I used to do, but I've kind of been shaped out of it by just being, so reinforced over and over again for using this different approach.
I can see that because I never feel good on the other side of an argument, even if I feel as though I won, honestly, because you don't, unless that person actually stops and says, oh my gosh, I see the light. I come to the, which has never happened to me. So
such a good point, right?
Even if I win, I can feel a greater disconnect between me and that other person.
Yes.
And so playing the validation game, at least it gives you something new to do, because now I'm at the age where I have my certain things that I feel like could be a hill I will die on. I've done enough research. I don't think you're going to, I don't like saying you'll never change my mind because when presented with good evidence, I will always change my mind. But there's certain topics where I feel like I've gone through the evidence. And so I'm bored. I'm bored. I'm saying the same things I've said 1,000 times. Why do I need to say it one more time and create a new disconnect in a relationship that was fine 12 minutes ago?
The other thing that validation facilitates or enables is those relationships that have become distant because of something. Nowadays, frankly, it's often political perspectives and candidates that were endorsed, but these issues that have become points of division in our relationships, once you have this different way of communicating, you can rebuild and you can start to reestablish those connections. And that, I think, I do a lot of work in my clinical practice in helping families basically mend after there's been a rupture or a period of alienation. And it's a really beautiful process to see that mend. And I know of no other way to facilitate it than by having each side try and validate something in the other person's perspective. So yeah, I just can't say enough about it. I love it. I love validation.
I love it too. I just have usually thought about it on the receiving end. But yeah, when I see validation as just the word for I see you, I feel you, I think the older I've gotten, the more I see that all relationships come to that. We have this need to make ourselves known so that we feel seen. We explain ourselves because we don't feel understood. Mm-hmm. And that's why so many of us are surrounded by people and we still feel lonely because we haven't developed this skill of giving that to one another. And so I'm curious, say you realize that you have a relationship that you may have been unintentionally damaging because you're not seeing this aspect of it. You're invalidating them. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How do you open that door to change? Because I think a lot of people become skeptical of like, oh, now Melissa's coming and she's acting different than she's ever asked. We're going to end up in this argument again or something like that.
Yeah. So it's a load. There's a lot there. I was trained in a set of skills that would basically help me, regardless of how much I agree, disagree, empathize with the other person. I've got some way to validate. At the lowest level, I can just give my attention and be non-judgmental. And so we've got skills to help you do that. And then, there's some really advanced skills if you really truly feel what the other person's saying. But I think what you're getting at is perhaps more simple, which is to simply make your intentions known. You can just say, I feel like I've done a lot of talking at you and not a lot of listening. That doesn't mean I don't have a lot to say, because I do. A lot of things that I think are important. But in this conversation, I'm not going to front load with that. Like, I want to listen. I find that to be just like so immediately healing. If someone says to you, I just want to listen. Like, you just kind of like, you can really relax into that, like, okay, yeah, sure. So this morning, like whatever the case may be, like we immediately feel safer and more open. And so if you're trying to approach a conversation differently or change a dynamic, that is the place to start, is to signal that, no, I'm serious this time. I'm going to listen. Oh, even better, you can give them permission to flag you if you start to problem solve or give your perspective. Like, because you could just say, I'm not great at this. I'm just giving it a shot. So feel free to flag me if I overstep. But that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I like code words that are ridiculous because
I do too. Taco meat.
Taco meat. Yeah. So what are some of your tips for actually getting inside someone's head to see where they're coming from while your own trigger red flags are firing of to try to mold you back into your accustomed behavior?
Yeah, trigger red flags, and then also boredom. Like, we're really quick to check the box of like, I get it, I've heard this, so that we can like think about, I don't know, whatever else we need to, what we saw on TikTok or whatever, right? Like, so you need to really corral your boredom a little bit. And as therapists, we play this little game that is actually incredibly helpful. Okay. All I'm doing when someone's come to me with a problem, because imagine, I don't know people from Adam when they come to me, and I've got to all of a sudden be clued into everything that's going on with them and show interest and care if they're going to feel comfortable working with me. So as someone starts talking, I'm just playing this game where I'm trying to figure out, like, what's this person's point and how could I do a better job of making it? And it's that second piece. To be clear, I don't talk over them. I don't say anything. I don't ever, at least at this stage, say what I'm thinking. I'm just figuring it out in my head. Like, how would I make this more concise? What evidence might I pull in to make their point? It's almost like you're like on a debate team and you have to debate some like random topic, like why you should have guns. I mean, presuming that's not your belief. And you've just got to like put everything into it to make the best argument you can. If you listen in that way, you will naturally ask questions and lean in at the appropriate times. Like, because you're trying to flesh out this story. You're trying to like really understand it so that you can make it concise. And in so doing, you'll ask for information. You'll attend in a fundamentally different way. So like, if you watch really great late night show hosts, or even some of like, the old school, like Oprah back in their day, these folks, if you know, once you know about this little trick, you'll notice that they're all kind of doing it. They want to get the best interview that they can out of whoever they're talking to. So they're looking for like, how can I help this person along, right? And you can tell that based on the follow-up questions they ask. Like, they're just trying to pull it out. That's what you want to do. You want to listen in that way. So just try and figure out that two-parter. What's this person's point, and how could I do a better job of making it? Does that make sense?
That is often what I do in a podcast interview. So I totally understand.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
But I'm interested to know, because I think the big hiccup here comes with a problem that has been exacerbated in the last decade, is that we all feel like we already know the other person's point so well because all of our points are derived, like you said, from the TikTok video that displays everyone, like the other political side or the other this, in the most ridiculous way possible. So you hear like, oh, this person, we'll use your example, thinks we should own guns, but all of a sudden you're firing away. And I guess that would be mitigated by me switching around to be like, well, how can I make this point? But I feel that there could often be an internal conflict. I know I've been in arguments like that where I'm like, let's try curiosity. I'm like, oh my God, now I have to sit here and listen to 1,000 points that I've already researched.
Okay. Two points here. One that was, again, just kind of like light bulb moment for me in my work. There's always something valid in somebody's experience or perspective. That doesn't mean that the totality of it is valid. Okay, so a person's experience, their perspective is based on their thoughts, their emotions, and their behavior. Okay, I just have to find what's valid there. Oftentimes, their thoughts are not valid, in my opinion. I don't think it's logical that you should vote for this person or support guns, have guns in the home and, die on that cross. Like, I don't get that, just where we're at in this country. It's not a position I support. But why does that matter to this person? Like, where's the validity in what they're saying? I don't agree with the logic, but they really care about this. Okay? Their emotions, they're afraid, they're concerned, they feel threatened, right? I can get that. I can understand why somebody would want to protect themselves if they are feeling those things. Okay? The desire to protect yourself, that is valid if you're feeling threatened. Okay? So all I need to look for is like, what makes sense to me? And it is on me to find it. That is the more important point. So in my work, I've worked with folks who have done all sorts of things, like really disturbing things. Oftentimes, the therapist, that's where they end up. And I've got to figure out how to work with this person. And I can't get there if I'm just like, heard it, been there, done that. That's stupid. I can't. It will not work. So I need to find something in what they're describing, in their perspective, that I can validate. And that work is on me. And so that actually becomes a very interesting game to kind of play in these situations. Where is the validity? It's either in their thoughts, their emotions, or their behavior. Doesn't have to be in all of it, just one. Where is it?
And frankly, I might have been bored in the conversation either way, so at least this gives me something fun to do.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, it's interesting. I've always loved watching like, really dramatic Netflix series on like the worst serial killer or like the whatever. You're like, I just really get into it. But part of what I'm looking for is I always imagine like if I had to work with this person, where is this behavior coming from? They're doing something that I find disgusting and horrendous and X, Y, and Z. Where's the chain of cause and effect that explains how they got here? And where can I say, oh, I get that? That doesn't mean I accept what they did. That doesn't mean I think it's okay. But it does say, well, okay, with that level of neglect as a child, I can see where that would mess a person up. Right? I could understand that. That's what I'm looking for, is that piece.
Where do people go wrong when they are trying to validate someone?
I think we've hit on some of the main mistakes. One is to confuse it with praise. So they are really, oh, you did such a good job, right? To the kid who created a, let's be honest, crap macaroni project from kindergarten, right? Like it's just, it doesn't look that great. It's not a great piece of art. And you're going, oh my gosh, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Like that doesn't feel authentic, right? What would feel authentic would be to say, I can see you've worked so hard on this, right? Like, that's amazing. How long did it take you? Oh my God. Like, I can genuinely feel that in me, like that pride, their eyes lighting up when I recognize their work. Like, all of that feels authentic. It's not praise, okay? It's not like over the top. And therefore, you don't have to praise something that someone didn't work hard on that isn't great. You know what I mean? Like it's just attend to the valid. The other is that they confuse it with agreeing. So as we've discussed, I don't have to agree with somebody to validate their perspective. I don't eat meat. I don't agree with the decision to eat meat. Sorry to anyone who eats meat. It's not that big of a deal, just a little bit. But I can validate that perspective. I've been in those shoes. I get it. I genuinely do. And so if I focus on that instead of what I disagree with, the work becomes much easier. So if you're getting tripped up with this, ask yourself, am I in trouble here because I feel like I have to agree and I don't? And or am I focusing on praise instead of validation?
When does sharing your own mess help someone feel seen versus turning into a pity party or stealing the mic?
So self-disclosure, disclosure is one of the I mentioned we've got like 8 skills that we could use to validate somebody. And disclosure is at like the very top of that. It's like deeply validating. It communicates a high level of I'm there, I get it, I care. Okay, those are kind of the notes you're trying to hit with validation. And boy, disclosure can get you there. It's also pretty risky because if you strike out, it could really hurt you or damage the relationship, right? So if you make it all about you, as we've seen plenty of people do in our lives, right? They start out well-intended and then they're like, but I had to, I had to walk 46 miles to school in the rain and I get it, but and it just becomes all about their trials and tribulations and you tune out. Not super helpful. Also, if you go bigger or deeper than the other person was ready to go, that can be a little uncomfortable and awkward. So the trick with disclosure is to do it like swiftly and then revert back to the other person. So I might disclose something and then I struggled with depression for about a decade from when I was like 16 to about 26. And sometimes I'm working with a client who I'm treating for depression, and they've had it with the healthcare system. They've had it with a bunch of therapists and psychiatrists who frankly judge them and pathologize them and seem to be making the situation worse. And they're given up. They've given up. They don't want to hear it from me. I can, in that moment, and I have many times disclosed, no, I get it. I don't get the totality of what you're going through, but I've struggled with depression and it's hell. And I hate that you are in that space. It breaks my heart. But I want to help you get out of it. Okay. What can we do? What's one thing we could do? Or something to that effect. So I show my cards and then I flip back to the other person. I might say like, but for me, thankfully, I didn't overeat. You know, some people really have a problem with that, and that then becomes its own problem. They're binging and everything else. I didn't have that. So actually, like what you're describing sounds harder in some ways than what I went through. So I'll like bow to their experience. I'm not trying to trump them, but I'm willing to be human. You know, there's something very powerful when we say like, I see myself in you, especially when it's something that the other person feels ashamed of or that they expect to be judged for. I think that's part of what's so powerful in AA. You know, everyone stands up and it's like, yeah, I'm Caroline and I'm an alcoholic. I'm not. But if I were, and I were to say that, like, that's the power. Like, we're all just being who we are without shame.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That dropping your own armor, I've found really gets it allows with a little more closeness, but it's so, like you said, dangerous. It's easy to all of a sudden get lost in your own story. And then it's like, wait, we were talking about, the other person's like, we were talking about me. What's happening here? What are other ways that you can validate other than just verbally?
So some of the most basic. So just on like that, remember I was talking about just to show that you're engaged, you're paying attention. I talked about doing that two-parter, like, you know, what's this person's point and how could I improve upon it? And then there's a lot of just the nonverbal stuff, like eye contact, like proximity, like smiling. We kind of like roll our eyes at this stuff. And yet I think every single person felt the distance that the absence of those signals created during the pandemic. We were so far from each other, and none of us were looking at each other in the eyes. Just we weren't there yet technologically. And the effect is real. Like, I very much prefer to see my patients in person than via virtual. If you and I were speaking in person, it would feel like a more connected experience because those signals are coming across louder and clearer. Okay, so the nonverbal stuff in and of itself is pretty basic in it, just attending. At a higher, again, if you really want to show that kind of empathy quality to validation, just expressing your own emotions. If someone tells me about something devastating that happened to them and I'm sitting there stone-faced and nodding, I mean, maybe I get it, but if I start to tear up, clearly I get it. Right. And again, there's risks to being emotionally vulnerable, but allowing yourself to take those risks is part of what validation is about. Right. We're not protecting ourselves so much. It's like, I'm willing to be vulnerable in seeing your vulnerability, if that helps you feel seen.
When you're trying to understand someone else's reaction, how do you spot what's really going on if, say, their reaction seems over the top? Because I think that's what a lot of disagreements, arguments, especially in close relationships, come back to. Somebody freaks out and the other person's like, wait, this is this little thing.
Yeah, I think the other big distractor is like anger and frustration, which people readily jump to and quickly express, and then it immediately puts, you know, the other person on the defensive. So one shortcut that I found to be super helpful is to look for the fear beneath the anger. Anger is typically a secondary emotion. meaning it's another emotion. Typically, that other emotion is fear. So if someone goes into attack mode, it's because they're feeling threatened in some way, shape, or form. If you try and ask yourself, what is threatened for the other person here? What's at stake? What are they afraid of losing? What do they think is being compromised? The defensiveness on your end will drop way down because they seem like much less of a threat to you and more like somebody who feels threatened, which is the case.
The question that comes up is, well, maybe it's just my programming of hearing so often that, oh, we're doing too much for validation. And maybe it's solved by the sort of redefinition we talked about in the beginning. But I feel like part of what I've been working on the last few years is learning to do things without validation. So where's that disconnect?
So validation from others and self-validation are not in conflict. I think where for some reason we feel like we have to choose one or the other, or that's often how the two are pitted in like discussion, right? Like you're either totally relying on everybody else to feel validated, or you go it alone and you're just like, you so see your worth and you don't need other people and blah, blah, blah. It's just not quite true, right? Like it's just a fact that when people feel invalidated by others, their mental health suffers. Okay, if you have any doubt about that, look at the suicide and self-harm statistics amongst folks who are in the LGBTQ plus communities. They are significantly higher. And that tends to be the case with marginalized groups in which there is a lot of societal judgment. And the message is, you are not accepted. When that is the case, we suffer. That is a fact, okay? It is also true that being able to see the validity in our own experiences, having that come from within, is helpful, is healthy, is beautiful. But it's not that you need that in place of the other stuff. It's that the two coexist. I put so much work into validating my clients, in large part because I want them to develop the ability to see the validity in their own experiences. And that's really hard to do if everyone and everything around you says what you're thinking and feeling is wrong, right? And so the two go together. Now, that being said, I have been in situations. I was treated for breast cancer a couple years ago, and I had this really weird response to the chemo, which is that it would give me this, sorry, this is a bit of self-disclosure. It gave me this dissociative feeling. And so like when you're going through chemo, they gave you like a Bible-sized book of like possible side effects, right? It's like everything because chemo's nasty stuff. Nowhere in there did they describe this symptom of feeling like I felt like I was dissociated, like I wasn't myself, like things like I love comedy and I would just hate it. And like, I love cats and kittens and they would just like kind of irk me. Like everything that felt like me, just, I was disconnected from, and it would last for about 72 hours. And I got to tell you, it was hell. And it was so scary because every time I would go through chemo, I was afraid I was going to get stuck in that, or that I was going to like say or do something like out of character for myself. It was really scary. And so I kept bringing it up. Like, you go to your doctor. So how have you been since your last appointment? And I would flag this like weird dissociative thing that was going on. And they would be like, yeah, I've never heard of that before. So how about your joints? Like there was just this real sense that I got that like, I haven't heard of that. That's not a thing. That's not real. And then, another layer that I would add to that is like, what's wrong with you? Are you making things up? Why are you being so dramatic? Like that, there's that level of self-talk that also kind of creeps in when I'm getting those external messages. And I will say that having a strong self-validation practice, it allowed me to see the validity in my experience, even though it was being negated by those kind of around me in the healthcare system, right? The people I would have trusted, the experts who like, if they don't see it, then it must not be a thing, right? And so it's true that being able to self-validate can protect you from some of those signals of invalidation externally. But it's also true that if you're constantly being invalidated, it gets much harder to see the validity in your experiences.
I get triggered by the medical field. So I'm sitting there like, that just validates everything I just believed. So,
doesn't it? Doesn't it? Right?
Yeah.
It's like if there's one community that could really use just like a mandatory workshop on validation, it's like the whole medical community.
I'd give them like a couple years worth of workshops.
Every surgeon has got to do it, right? Like everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my mom. She like really wanted a tummy tuck for years, and she finally got it. They upsold her into a butt lift at the same time. So excited going in. My mom's not the typical plastic surgery woman. And anyways, long story short, they botched a number of things. She lost her belly button. Her belly button disappeared after this surgery, and the doctor just invalidated her, just gaslighted her the whole way. It's been 10 years now. She's finally working with a doctor who is like, all of this is wrong. I cannot like validating everything. And you can see like this emotion in her face. Like she's being validated for the first time in over a decade. And she doesn't even know what to do with it at this point. She's like, I could get surgery to fix it. I don't want to go under, but gosh, it just feels so good to be seen, to be believed, to not be talked over. And it's emotional to watch.
You know what that reminds me of too, not to take it in a totally different direction, but something that's really stood out to me, in the Me Too movement, we had the Epstein trials. There was the trial, I can't remember the name of the physician with the girls' Olympic team who was accused of sexual abuse. And hearing these women in these trials talk and hearing woman after woman say, I just want to be able to get up there and talk about what happened and have him not be able to leave the room. I just want to be able to get up there and talk and look him in the eye, even if he doesn't look at me back. I just want to be heard. Wow. Like that is what I'm talking about when I say that this stuff is powerful, that it is essential to who we are and what we need from each other. Okay? Like these are not small potatoes. I really believe that this is something quite critical to our relationships and our mental health that we have not done a great job of talking about, conceptualizing, or framing.
Tell me about chronic invalidation. How does that occur? Can it be reversed, or do you just have to start over?
Yeah. So borderline personality disorder, that disorder I talked about that DBT was created for, is a disorder that grows out of a pervasively invalidating experience. Okay, so folks with BPD, more often than not, come from environments where they were routinely told that what they were thinking or feeling was wrong. Okay, their emotions were consistently dismissed. And in some cases, in many cases, there was often an element of sexual abuse as well, which can be incredibly invalidating. And so what we find with folks who come from those environments is that no, they don't trust their emotions. They have learned to disregard and dismiss them. Instead, they defer to the environment to tell them what they're thinking or feeling. They don't have a great sense of self. Okay? All of these things have been fractured and compromised. Now, the question is, can that be reclaimed? Yes. And again, part of that process is providing clear signals to those individuals about when their emotions, when their thoughts, when their behaviors are valid, and when there's something off there, right? I can understand why you're so upset that I was late, given you think it means that I don't care about you. Like if I thought that you didn't care about me, I'd be upset too. But actually, let's look at that thought that I don't care about you, because that's not the case. All right. So I'm constantly looking for where's the validity in what this person is saying, because I need them to feel solid in that. And then we need to challenge the parts that are maybe causing problems for them or are less accurate. But long story short, yes, it takes a lot of validation and clear signals for somebody who's been, in a situation like that to kind of recover their sense of self.
I feel like people are able to dismiss a lot of tactics in the self-help world when they don't understand what's actually happening. But you talk about how there's actual measurable changes in the brain when people are being validated.
The brain and the nervous system. So we use validation in couples therapy. If couples they start going at it, they're fighting, I'll immediately intervene and basically coach each person on finding validity, finding something they can validate in the other person's perspective. And once you succeed in doing that, it's like the temperature, zoom, it drops. You can feel it. It's palatable. And what we're feeling, what's happening in that moment, is somebody's sympathetic nervous system is actually regulated. Okay? So the more invalidated we feel, the more flight or fight we become. Okay? We stop listening. We stop processing information well. We become aggressive. And what research has shown again and again and again is that when somebody is dysregulated and then you validate them, all of those signals of dysregulation start to calm down. The galvanic skin response decreases. Eyes stop dilating, right? We actually see physical indicators of sympathetic regulation. So I always say it's like putting an adorable cat filter on, your partner during a conflict. Like they just look so much less threatening as soon as they start validating you, right? Like it's just harder to stay mad at them. They look like so sweet. And truly to our brains, that's kind of what's happening. They've become less of a threat.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can feel my body shift completely. It's so wild when you start bringing awareness to more areas of your life, how you realize that these certain states are totally shiftable, but we cling to them. And I find that in argument where I'm holding my side. It's like, no, but you have to understand me. It's like everything tenses up, like I'm wearing this armor. And the moment that I'm validated or something happens to break my focus, it's like, it feels like I put on the kitten suit.
Yeah, it's so true, right? But now here's the thing. Oftentimes we are doing our damnedest to validate somebody and it doesn't work. Okay? Like we didn't land it. We tried, we used all the skills this woman said to use in her book. We did it by the book, didn't work. Okay? If that's the case, it just means you didn't land the validation. It does not mean validation doesn't work. Okay? I have this all the time when I'm working with parents of, again, kind of preteen, teenage kids. They're like, oh, I validated her. I said I was so impressed with how she'd worked hard and I saw the effort that she put into it and X, Y, or Z. And she just like rolled her eyes at me. So like my kids are immune to validation. And it's like, nope, that just didn't land, right? That sounded like you rubbing their nose in the fact that they finally worked hard for something you thought they should be working on. Didn't feel like you actually understood and saw them in that moment. And like, it's just a really important thing to note because this is a skill. It is absolutely a skill. And if you're just starting out, like imagine when you're just getting on a bike, you wobble and you fall like a lot. And if you don't get back on the bike and keep doing it, you're not going to figure it out. And even once you're like great at this stuff, every relationship has a little bit of like a learning curve to it where you have to figure out like, what's this person's language? How do I attune to that? And like, yeah, okay, you don't need to do this for everyone, but like for your kids, for your partners, for those people you love, I really encourage you to like try and figure out that language and don't get all like, defensive or throw out the whole thing the first time it doesn't land. Okay. It's not always going to land. And that's how you get better at it.
That reminds me of earlier when we were talking about how it's gotten a lot better to come to the table, own my side. That's my first instinct now with almost anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember about 7 years ago, my best friend at the time, she was the kind of person where I would own my side, even if I thought she was 90% in the wrong and I had the 10%. And she was the kind of person that would be like, well, I'm glad you finally realized this. And it became so difficult. But what shifted for me was trusting that the outcome doesn't need to be the way I envision it or my ideal scenario for us to both still be in our truth. Me coming to the side, me validating somebody, they can end up just as stubborn or not, like nothing shifts at all on their side, but guess who changes? I do. I become a little bit better at dropping my own armor. Also, there's been times people have said things to me and I reacted defensively and I looked like I took none of it in, but it sat with me for years to come. It's something that shifted 7 years later because I keep replaying what that person said. And so I think we get attached to outcomes and, oh yes, I'll employ this skill because it'll get me what I want. But can you do it just to be a better person?
Yeah, I love that. It also though brings up the point for me. Like, I really want this to just be, again, like, imagine if people didn't really understand the concept of compassion, right? If it was just kind of foggy, none of us really knew what it was, and we couldn't ask for compassion or like there was, expect it from our relationships. It would just be like weird, okay? Along those same lines, it seems totally reasonable to me that you would also want validation from her. Like, when my husband, Matt, like comes at me with all this problem solving on, what I can do to, I don't know, improve my setup for my podcasting when it goes poorly. And all I wanted him to say was like, oh, that sucks. I get it. Like, I'm going to say, like, the problem solving's great. I really need some validation. And like, then he can be like, oh, gear shift. Sorry, I was focused on the wrong target. Right. Unfortunately, most of us don't live in relationships where we have that type of like understanding and language. But it's totally reasonable that you would want that validation as well. And to even like, to say like, I'm really making an effort here to validate your point. I see validity in it. It's hard for me to keep doing so when I don't feel anything in return.
I think that's why she's not my best friend anymore. And I still send her love. There's no love lost. We grew apart. And that's how I knew we stopped really being able or willing or wanting to see each other. And the people that we saw each other as were in a different phase of our lives. We had bonded over different things and we're both becoming. And so I think we can use these things as, again, I became a better person through that. And I think she did too. I still like her stuff on Instagram, like it's still sending love from afar. But for some reason during that period of our life, there just kept being these silly little frictions and it wasn't easy anymore. And I am kind of in the boat of, I think in the beginning of my self-development journey, I was like, cut that shit out, bad energy, and then I got to a point where I'm like, well, that's kind of giving my power to everybody else. I always have to leave instead of sitting with it. Or why are so many things uncomfortable for me? Yeah. And so then I was like, well, can I transform this or can I be in it? What is there here to teach me? And
I love
so
that.
I deal with things differently now. But, when I get the same message over and over again, or when things stop feeling good, I can use that energy elsewhere is just how I look at it.
I mean, and again, I made a pretty big point with a lot of like statistics and research throughout my book on how important validation is to our relationships and to our mental health. And so I don't really encourage you to stay in relationships where you're feeling not a lot of validation, and certainly not ones in which you feel frequently invalidated. So it's one thing to not get validation. It's another to feel like people are actually angry at you for your emotions or that they judge you for going through whatever you're going through. Those aren't healthy relationships. Now, I don't think we have to give up on people right away. There are skills they can develop. There are ways that, and I can give them that opportunity to grow and say, like, this is what I need. But I'm not beholden to them if they choose not to pursue it or to work on it. That's where I kind of let myself go. So I can identify what I need. And if it's something that's reasonable for the other person to attain, I'll communicate that. And if they don't take that, then I won't take their shit. Quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree completely. And also, I find a lot of those feelings of void or lack in a relationship can be a gift too, at least in that moment, not to keep showing back up to, but it's like, oh, it's really hurting me when this person doesn't see this in me. What am I not giving to myself? You know,
and that's interesting.
It might also be a step away from this relationship, but it's also an opportunity of something that I'm clearly needing.
Like, why do I need this? Why does it sting so much that she's not recognizing it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is that right?
Yeah. It's like, am I not recognizing it in myself and I need to see it from her? And then it's like this sort of toxic form of needing the validation. And I'm not saying that's always the case. Like you said, if we're invalidating each other in a relationship, no one's seeing each other. But I think there's always room for introspection. And there might be something there that I'm not immediately seeing.
Or that you're not fully integrated on. I think the things that like I long to feel accepted in by others are the things I've struggled most to accept myself, right? Like it was a big decision point for me. Like, was I going to talk about having had depression in podcasts and stuff when I do publicity for this book? And the issue for me was that it felt very like vulnerable, like I'm afraid people are going to judge me because I kind of still judge myself, was the realization for me. And like that, when I really thought about like what's holding me back here, it was like, frankly, just like picturing I literally like pictured people like rolling their eyes, you know, listening to a podcast, just like very like rejection. And so it was so clear to me that like, I'm still like judging myself. I'm the one kind of rolling my eyes and like, oh, you had it so bad. Right. Like, and so, yeah, you're right. It was like, I needed to reckon with something in myself. And that's why I was protecting it from others on some level.
Well, there's so much gold in this book. I highly recommend everyone reads it, even if you don't think you do, because you get 2 chapters in and you will realize you do. So I love leaving listeners with one thing to focus on or do to just bring this into their life, to help them start practicing. What would you leave them with?
I love this question. One of the greatest gifts that was given to me in my life was this one piece of advice that I got from an advisor, like, 15 years ago. And they said, when a patient comes to you with an issue, when they bring something up, ask yourself, should I respond with problem solving or validation? 90% of the time, we respond with problem solving. We want to fix it. We want to take it away. We want to make it better. You didn't do well on your spelling test? Okay, we can study before school on the drive to school next time. Okay, that'll do it. We can take this away. Let me fix this. And yet, most of the time when people come to us, they're seeking validation. They just want to feel seen. And that doesn't mean you can just validate. You can problem solve down the line, but just ask yourself, when your partner, when your kids, when your colleagues come to you, is it a moment to just validate what they're going through and see them in it and say, I see this. This is hard. Or do you need to go in and fix it and make it easier? Just pause and ask yourself that question.
And for listeners who want to learn more about your work, find your book and ways to work with you, where's the best place to connect?
Yeah, so I've got a website, drcarolinefleck.com. My book Validation is everywhere and anywhere you get books. And I am on TikTok and Instagram and LinkedIn, Dr. Caroline Fleck.
All the links from this episode will be at mindlove.com/408. Your challenge for this week is something that Caroline shared that completely shifted how I think about every conversation. When your partner, your kids, your colleagues, when they come to you with something, Just pause and ask yourself, should I respond with problem solving or validation? Or how our family says it, support or solutions? Although maybe that's not the best, because some would argue that solutions are support, just a different kind. Anyways, most of the time we jump straight into fix-it mode, but what people are actually seeking is to just feel seen. So you don't have to choose one forever. You can validate first and problem solve later, but just that pause, that moment of asking yourself what they really need right now, will change everything about how your relationships feel. Because sometimes what comes up might be just that this is an opportunity to not act on autopilot for once. We love bringing things back to ourselves. We love feeling like the hero. But when you can actually just be an open space for another human being, I think it changes both of you a little bit. And this reminds me, bringing it back to me, just in case you couldn't tell, this is your last chance to get Story Love at its current price. And the thing is learning to tell your story is kind of like finding your truth from the inside out. So you've heard that phrase, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. Well, that's what figuring out your own story, what your life has been leading you to, that's how you do it. That's how you get the courage to take your story out into the world. It becomes a lot easier once you know it, once you know your truth and why you're here. And although that's worth it on its own, that is just a fraction of Story Love. You'll not only know your story, you'll know how to take it out into the world, how to leverage other people's audiences, how to create all of your brand assets and make your personal brand uniquely you. So reach out to me on Instagram while I'm still giving out this secret price before the ads go live, and tell me you want to learn to tell your story. It is the perfect time. You can also sign up for the Morning Mind Love at mindlove.com or text the word morning to 33777 to get some daily inspiration right to your inbox. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.